Welcome to TALRadio powered by the Touch Life Foundation. As we explore the significance of relationships in our lives, we are reminded of the wisdom in the words, the quality of our relationships determine the quality of our lives. Today, we have the privilege of introducing Dr. Vicki Broome. She's a trained psychologist and also an Ayurvedic consultant. She has transformed lives through her relationship programs, combining Eastern traditional practices with Western scientific temper. An expert in transcendental meditation, her thesis linked TM to marriage quality. As co-director of Think Skills Training, she has delivered international management workshop for decades. It's an honor to have her with us today. Welcome to our show, Dr. Vicki.
Oh, thank you, Pavithra, for that nice introduction and for having me on your show. I mean, it's a delight to be on such a special radio show that's dedicated to an optimistic world, spreading positivity. It's really great. And, I was dedicated to India's ever-rising collective consciousness. What an honor to be on a show like this. Thank you.
The honor is all ours, Dr. Vicki Broome, because the kind of background that you have is so wholesome, so holistic. So you have a blended background of both Western psychology as well as Vedic knowledge as well. So I would like to start by asking that what is the difference in the approach, when it comes to psychology in the Western concepts and in the Vedic concept as well? And is it really essential to understand these differences?
So I think it's really helpful to understand the differences and to, in fact, combine the approaches. But let me begin, first of all, by explaining what is Vedic psychology, or we could call it consciousness-based psychology. And we'll take a short look at, the differences and the similarities. And most people today look to modern Western psychology for emotional wellness. And, Western psychology, we know, was started in about 1950 by William James. And even since 1960, like say since Maslow, there have been about 50 personality theories. I mean, there's huge differences in how different psychologists view the world, because every personality theory is somebody's worldview. What is healthy, what's man's place in the universe, how do we develop, and they're all valid, otherwise they wouldn't survive. But modern psychology maintains a dichotomy between mind and body, and that's kind of the main difference, because Vedic psychology maintains that consciousness is the basis of both mind and body. And Vedic psychology, there's a big renewed interest now in Vedic psychology or in consciousness-based psychology. It's responding to today's need for a more spiritual psychology. As world consciousness was rising, you talk about the rising collective consciousness of India. Mm-hmm. As world consciousness has been rising, there's been a much greater awareness of our human potential, not just for experiencing normal adaptive behavior, which is what you would have got if you saw a psychologist before, but, also people want to know about mystical experiences. They want to know about experiences of the higher self, about true genius, enlightenment, human development, all these kinds of things. So today, typically, if somebody goes to a helping professional, they don't just they want a more spiritual perspective. Now, it wasn't only Vedic psychology, that came out of this rising world consciousness. In Western psychology too, the whole of transpersonal psychology was developed to respond to that need for a much more spiritual kind of psychology. So that's really where it was coming from. And you could say that, Vedic psychology is part of Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the oldest system of healthcare. Ayur means lifespan and Veda means knowledge. So it's knowledge of lifespan. And, from my perspective as a psychologist, Vedic psychology as part of Ayurveda is probably the least understood and maybe one of the most important aspects of Ayurveda, because you can't heal the body unless you heal the heart. I mean, Ayurveda is a mind-body therapy, that's definite. So now if we look a little bit more, also if you look at the word for health in the Vedic literature, it's a word called swastha. And that means established in the self. So in order to be healthy, you need to be established in the self, in the big self. We've got a wonderful resource and kind of resource, almost textbook, in Dr. Tony Nader. He's just putting out a book now called Consciousness is All That There Is. And consciousness, the nature of consciousness is bliss. Dr. Tony Nader is an MD, PhD, and he's a medical doctor that's trained at Harvard, so he has a very Western background. He has a PhD in neuroscience, but he's become globally recognized as an expert in the field of neuroscience and consciousness. Now, we have wonderful quotes from the Veda, like, for example, from the Upanishad, which says, the supreme self is ineffable bliss. So, the nature of ourselves is bliss. Or even from the Yoga Vasishta, which says, this world appears to be material, but in reality, it is pure consciousness. Okay, so what we're then doing is, if you look at Vedic psychology or consciousness-based psychology, what is its goal? Its goal is recovery, full recovery. Yeah. And recovery from what? From a fractured sense of self. We're sort of here to remember and recover from remember who we are intrinsically and recover from a fractured sense of self. Now, Pavithra, there's a nice story that goes, there were 10 men that were swimming across the Ganges bank as a group of friends. And as they were swimming across, the current got very strong. So when they got to the other side, they decided to count heads just to make sure that everybody had made it. And whoever counted, there were only 9. So they were just about ready to prepare for a funeral and grieving when they realized that always the one who was counting had been forgotten. So that was the problem, is that when we forget the self, we begin to suffer. And that's the concept of, in Vedic psychology, that suffering is really a mistake. It's a mistake of the intellects when we only see the surface values. And, we forget our own source in consciousness, in pure consciousness. And that's where we begin to forget. So, when people come and see you, they come and see you as a psychologist or a doctor or Ayurvedic doctor, they're going to be suffering. Nobody's coming to tell you how well they are. So it doesn't matter who you see as a client or as a patient. They are coming in because they are suffering in some way. But we get trained to see past the suffering, to know that at that moment that person has forgotten who they are, and to see that it is a mistake, so that the therapist or doctor needs to hold the wholeness for that person, which will make it easier for them to come back. Now, if you look at Western psychology, we look at all of the psychologies. Let's say healing is on a continuum. So right on the left, you get psychotic, neurotic, pathological, and all the way on the right, you get enlightened, higher states of consciousness, fully self-actualized. Now, if you take a Western psychology approach, the approach is to take people from the extreme left, which is the pathology, until about the middle, which is called adaptive. The person can hold a job, they can keep a functional relationship, maybe even a good relationship, and they're not in danger, to themselves or to others. But now that's where the Vedic psychologist would begin. So usually at that point, as a Western psychologist, we would discharge people. Okay, the therapy is now finished. But a Vedic psychologist likes to start from that point and take the people all the way to the end to help them to go to enlightenment or higher states of consciousness, which is, our true potential. And I think the main thing that Vedic psychology has really added is an understanding that the mind is hierarchically structured from concrete to abstract. So that at the level, at the surface of the mind, we have our level of speech. And there are Sanskrit terms for this. I could mention them as well. There's the Baikri level, or the level of thinking. That's our conscious mind, where it's very active, which is the Madhyama level. And then a little bit more subtle, we start coming to the subconscious mind, and then the unconscious mind, like levels of feeling, they call Pashanti, and that's about as far as Vedic psychology goes. But then beneath that, more subtle, is the level of pure consciousness, and it's called Para, and that's the word to remember. It's the Para level that's been missing out of Western psychology. And so, you said to me, and people, I mean, in the West, we talk about anchoring in the self, but that is really what we're talking about. And if you look at the Vedic therapies, should I just go on to comparing some of the Vedic therapies compared to the Western and how they combine or how they complete each other? Would you like that?
Yes, that would be a very interesting topic to discuss about.
You see, most people know about the Western therapies. They know about Jung and they know about, I'm just going to choose a few. So the Vedic therapies all Vedic therapies are to bring you home to yourself, to bring you more close to your own, pure potentiality and your large self. And there are therapies that are cognitive and there are therapies that are somatic. Now, with the cognitive therapies, the main thing is that when we have forgotten who we are, we need to remember. And remember, the word for to remember is called smrti. Now, this is very similar to, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very popular in the West. And with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a talk therapy and it can help you manage your problems by simply just change the way you think, change the way you feel, making choices, and then like a cognitive restructuring, and then you change the way you behave. So that is quite similar in many ways to the cognitive approach of remembering that if I'm suffering, I have forgotten. Or another good example of a Western psychologist who was very good with a cognitive approach. You could take someone like Viktor Frankl. Now, Viktor Frankl, he developed what's called logotherapy, and his whole thing was you can find meaning in each and every situation in life. Because from a Vedic psychology point of view, all circumstances are the doorway to the self. So people can come in from anywhere, Pavithra. They can be really suffering, they can be in a good place, but it doesn't matter what your circumstances are, it's always going to be the portal to the self. And what Viktor Frankl said was, life has meaning in all circumstances. And like he describes, because he was a Holocaust victim and he was a survivor, that the people who survived were the ones who were able to hold on to some form of meaning in that abominable situation. They were able to remember themselves in some way, and they got through. Now, another example you could take is Jung, because Jung is probably the closest to Vedic psychology in the West. And he also has the attainment of self as ideal, growing out of your personality type. And he also uses similar words, like he uses the collective unconscious, which we could talk about collective consciousness, and he's got all kinds of ingenious ways, of helping people to transition from their personality type to selfhood. But it excludes the power level, and that's really the most important contribution of Vedic psychology. And then just finally on this, before maybe we go on to another question, the other approach, which is, it's just invaluable, and it's very, very much an approach of Vedic psychology or consciousness-based psychology, is the somatic approach, not just the cognitive, but the somatic approach, because we have an understanding that all emotional pain is stored physically. It's somatized, it's stored in your body. And that's why you have pain, because consciousness heals much better than any tablet you could take. I mean, we are a real anesthetized society. We'd much rather take an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety, much rather take that than work on the issue. But what you feel, you heal. And consciousness, if it's directly applied to the discomfort in the body, it's, can heal it. It's actually easier to work with the body than it is to work with the mind. And so that is also just a wonderful, wonderful contribution of Vedic psychology. So I think does that answer that question?
Yes, I think it has been wonderfully answered, and there is so much of in-depth analysis of the difference that has been between the Western approach and the Vedic approach that has been told about. And there is so much of knowledge in what you have said, Dr. Vicki. And so we are now going to pivot a bit and talk about relationships, which is what you are specialized in particular.
Correct.
And so I want to understand what constitutes a happy relationship according to you. And what are some of the qualities that people who are having happy relationship possess? And while answering this question, I have a request. Could you also cover a bit about what are the kind of some of the consciousness and subconscious issues that impact relationships?
All right, so let me take that bit by bit. So,
Yeah.
first of all, what constitutes a healthy relationship? You know, the purpose of a relationship is to produce bliss. You can tell if it's a healthy relationship, if it's nourishing to both parties. That's just a simple criteria.
Yeah.
And another quality of a healthy relationship would be that it's not based on need, it's based on fullness. You know, it's not that the person needs the other one to complete themselves. So the key really is self-care, self-love. You know, because one can only be to others as what is to oneself. You can also only love others to the extent that you love yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, love is the power of connectedness with your big self.
Yeah.
And it gets to grow as you get to know yourself. And that happens through technologies of consciousness. So that would be the first thing. And, you know, we all talk about, I really want to find that deep, meaningful relationship. But the secret to finding the deeper level in the other is to find that level in yourself. Because if you don't find it in yourself, you really can't see it in the other person.
Beautiful.
You know, many people, and I would say probably especially women, but not only, consider relationships to be, if not the most essential vehicle for growth, but at least amongst the top 2 or 3 very, very important vehicles for personal growth. Okay, now the second thing you asked me, what did you say? What are the qualities of people who have good relationships?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's choose a few qualities because there are many and we've only got time. But let's
Yeah,
choose a
the
couple.
top 3 qualities, I would say.
Okay, let's take the top 3. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
You know, one quality that is very attractive in people and who people have good relations with are people are present. You know, established in themselves and in present time. Because people are attracted to people who are present, like fully engaged in the moment, like children and animals are attracted to present people. They seem to be more authentic. I mean, they've even done, you know, research on salespeople where instead of allowing them to read like a sales pitch, they've made them do it spontaneously with each client. And that means they're more in the moment, they're more present, and they sell much more because people are attracted to people who are in the present. And for that, you need to be comfortably in yourself. That's one quality. The other one, I think, is a really, really important quality for having a good relationship, is you need to give up the need for approval. You need to relinquish that need because, first of all, there's great freedom in that choice. But other people's opinions about you are not about you. They're about them. If you want to know about yourself, then look at your opinions about them. So we don't base our life on the opinions of others, really. And there's a term called self-referral as opposed to object referral. People who are object referral, you know, fitting into all society's little boxes and isms and that, they will not be as successful in their relationships as people who are defining themselves from inside out. You see, you can't please all people all the time, so you shouldn't even try. So I would say that that's an important quality, is people who are not needing that approval from that relationship or any relationship. Other one that I would choose, if I was to choose the third one, would people who give up judgment. They shed the burden of judgment because it is a burden. There's a lovely quote. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's by Mencius, who's a Chinese philosopher. He says, at birth, people are intrinsically good. So people have a natural inclination to be good or to be moral, to be virtuous. But what happens is stress happens in their lives. And we have to understand people from their perspective, not from our own. You know, why are they doing what they're doing? Could be something completely beyond their control. To understand that it's a stress thing when they're behaving, and that's not really who they are. And also we could be going, what can I learn from their off behavior? You know, so non-judging people have better relationships. There's also one lovely quote from Mahatma Gandhi. He says, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong.
Beautiful.
So,
Yes.
so non-judging people have better relationships.
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to just listen to you speak about relationship. There's so much of depth to it, and the interesting thing about the current generation is that we have so many devices, we have so many platforms to communicate, and yet we are a generation who struggle to communicate when it comes to relationships because we don't have. There is a lack of transparency. Sometimes there's a lack of authenticity, and most often, communication is regarded as the key element for a successful relationships.
Yeah.
And so my next question is on the communication skills, and how can people develop the necessary communication skill to particularly when it comes to a relationship, to have that ability to just tell what they feel and still feel connected and still feel, and I think part of it also has been already been answered by you regarding being non-judgmental.
Yeah, well, advanced communication strategies can definitely allow you to connect at a deeper level and improve our relationship. And I'll give you a couple of examples of advanced communication strategies. One thing we can, if we've got time, it might link to another question, is we can also talk about how people need to do, address, like they need to do their own emotional hygiene, because so that they're coming from a good space. But let's take this communication one. So, for example, I've got here maybe 4 or 5 examples of how we could really improve our communication skills. Like, one is we should speak sweet truth. I mean, we should
Sweet truth.
we should be able to express what we feel, especially if it's appropriate. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of resentment and sabotaging because you're not being able to say what you want. So we should speak our truth, but we should speak it sweetly, and we shouldn't hurt anyone. We can express it in words that aren't harsh or abusive. Express it kindly. Because the thing is, if you hurt someone or you hurt the environment, then there's always going to be some negative influence that is created. So I would say that's a great communication skill. Now, another one I think is very useful. You may object to people's behavior, but you shouldn't dismantle people. You might have to communicate that you don't like what they do, but you shouldn't dismantle them as if there's something wrong with them as people. So, for example, that's something that's taught with children with parent effectiveness training. You have to correct your children, but you don't make them feel there's something wrong with themselves just because their behavior is not really, what you think is right. But one technique that could be used is responsible language. And instead of saying, you make me feel this, or you did this to me, and therefore I felt this way, or therefore I reacted this way, we have to remember we are responsible for our own emotional reactions. We're not victims. We can choose our reactions. And so I've got a little phrase here which people can, write down straight away and use. And it goes, I feel ... when you ... So please, I feel hurt. So I'm not saying you hurt me. I'm responsible for choosing this reaction. I feel hurt when and you tell them exactly what they did. I feel hurt when you come home and you just ignore me and you go straight to the television set and turn it on. So please, now you can tell them exactly how to change it. So please, why don't we have a little bit of quality time together? We haven't seen each other all day, and then we can go and watch TV together. So that's a great way. You're not making them wrong. You're saying, I'm sorry, I'm responsible for what I feel, but this is the effect it has on me, and this is what you're doing, and here's a suggestion. What do you feel about that? So we can use responsible language. That's very useful. And you also spoke about, actually listening. This is so important, and you touched on that. We need to learn listening skills, particularly active listening skills. We need to create safe spaces or safe conversations, where a safe space is where, like, both individuals get to express themselves freely without being, criticized and made to feel guilty and made to be wrong. And, for example, there are lots of techniques you can do. First of all, we in our relationships, programs, we teach a skill which has got steps, but you listen, without interrupting people. And you try and hear what they're really saying and what they're really feeling, because you validate them by reflecting back to them what they said, but more important is what they felt, because the emotional level is much more powerful than the mental level. People make their decisions based on an emotional level, and then they justify with the intellect afterwards. So you listen, you don't interrupt, you validate by reflecting back to them what did they think and what did they feel, and you only respond, when you feel that they feel heard and understood, then you can have your chance. So there are lots of skills: mirroring, not interrupting, reflecting content, and so on. But very important skill. One thing also would be, if you're very emotional, like let's say you're angry, you should learn the power of pause. If you act when you are angry, you will lose. It's like, the famous Bhagavad Gita. Krishna didn't want Arjuna to fight when he was angry, because he was going to lose. So always in life, if you're emotional, then don't act. Put some space between the stimulus and the response. Same thing with saying no. Sometimes we have to say no, and then the person's not going to like it. Maybe you could delay the response. Delay it for a day or two when the emotions are lower, and that'll be a better way to do it.
That's wonderful.
Okay, those could be a couple of the strategies.
These are just wonderful strategies that you have been talking to us about, Dr. Vicki. And I think there is so much more to it. And we are a generation who are truly suffering with relationships in our life, because it has become a lot more complex in this day and time. So I see that your team has curated a wonderful course on relationship called SuperHabits for a Happy Relationship. Could you tell us a bit more about that, and what does it offer?
Well, there's a quote that says, it's a Rumi quote, and he says, "Whoever travels without a guide needs 200 years for a 2-day journey." So about 85% of people still have a really difficult time making changes in their life without help. So we've put together this course, which is, to take the vast theory of Vedic psychology and just make it more operationalized. Because very often people know the theory, but they're not sure how to make it practical and applied in their lives. And there are sort of 3 goals of the program. First of all, we would cover one area, which is know yourself. So we will help people, or help you be in touch with and process your emotions, and also eliminate the toxic ones. And we do a lot of on mind, emotion, body knowledge. You see, there are great differences in the way people are in relationships. And there's a big misperception that one size fits all. People are different. And often our standard reaction to something different to ourselves is just to try and change it to be more like ourselves. And if everybody's different, then we blame and we shame and we make them guilty. And Ayurveda identifies different mind-body types. And understanding that psychophysiological body type, really, really helpful. For understanding all kinds of differences in people, their personalities, their modes of conduct, how they deal with conflict, react to things, everything, emotional things, and so on. And so we cover that. We're going to help people identify their mind-body type, but teach them very important skills for harmonious relationships. And then the third thing would be the communication skills, some of the things that I've just mentioned, basically how to make your relationships deeper through good communication skills. And all the areas, a very practical course, all the areas will include knowledge, techniques, practical self-reflection exercises, breakout groups, so that people can really master this. There's an introductory talk actually on the 1st of July. It's a free talk on which people can go to. I think they can just go to relationships.superhabits.com. And there we're just going to do 5 hacks for happy relationship and explain how the course works and so on.
That'll be wonderful. That'll be useful for a lot of people, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners would like to take this to understand what the course has to offer, because even within these 30 minutes you were able to cover such a vast range of topic, and your voice is so healing and reassuring, Dr. Vicky, and we can feel that you'll have a lot more to cover with the course, and as well as with the 5 hacks workshop that you are conducting on the 1st of July. I wish you all the best for this, and I really hope that we'll end up be a generation who can value relationship and who can understand how to conduct ourselves in a relationship and work towards healthier, better relationship, and also to a better world.
No, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Pavithra, and it's nice to see how you actually reflect all the qualities that you uphold in your show. Your kindness. You've been a wonderful host. Your enthusiasm, your positivity. So thank you so much for having me on here with you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vicky, for giving us this privilege of hosting you, because it has been wonderful to have this conversation with you. And this is something I will also apply in my life. The things that you have said, it is so universal. It applies to people irrespective of their gender, where they belong, their race. And there is just so much of such a depth of knowledge which has been covered in such a short span of time, and I'm truly grateful for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You stay blessed.
With that, we come to an end of this special interview. This is your host, Pavithra Krishnakumar, signing off. Thank you so much for tuning in.